Have you ever wondered what's happening beneath the city while everyone above keeps living? Go up 20 or 30 meters and everything is normal. Traffic, people, daylight turning into night. Hundreds, maybe thousands of lives moving through routines. But down below, it's always night. A permanent artificial darkness filled with old machinery and rats. Or so I used to believe. That's how I would start a book, if the idea hadn't left me a long time ago, back when I took this job temporarily. 10 years later, I'm still here. Every time I tell myself I've gotten used to it, I understand the same thing again. You don't get used to this job. You only survive it, for as long as you can. I work for a restricted federal research facility located outside the city, beyond the last ring of suburbs, where the street lights start to thin out and empty lots take over. Officially, it's a research institute. Unofficially, it's a place you don't ask questions about. From the outside, it looks like nothing. A small, 5-story concrete building that could pass for an old school or a municipal office. The kind of structure built from a template, the kind meant to be ignored. I wouldn't be surprised if it was designed that way on purpose. But those 5 floors are just the visible part. There are 2 underground levels beneath the building, both far larger than the structure above. That's where the equipment is. That's where the labs are. Only 3 floors above ground are actively used. The top 2 are mostly dead space, storage for broken furniture, outdated electronics, and sometimes things that don't look broken at all, just abandoned. After what I'm about to tell you, it would be stupid to describe what the labs do. Posting this is already a risk, so I'll keep the details vague. What matters is this. I work even lower than the labs. Beneath those 2 underground levels, there's a utility basement, a network of tunnels and corridors that run far beyond the facility. They stretch under the city, branching out like roots. Some of them connect to older infrastructure. Some of them connect to the subway. And my job is to maintain them. When I first saw the job posting, I actually laughed. They wanted someone with a college degree to act as electrician, plumber, and night watchman, all in one. The pay was unusually high. They were willing to hire someone with no experience. I took it immediately. I pictured easy money, a quiet job, a few years of coasting. Then I went down there for the first time, and I understood why they paid so much. Those tunnels, built decades ago, have no permanent lighting at all. No bulbs, no emergency lamps, nothing. The only lights you get are what you bring with you. Once a month, I'm required to do a full inspection route, walking from the facility entrance to the point where our tunnels meet the subway infrastructure, and then walking back the same way. It takes nearly an entire day. I'm not assigned a partner, never was. And it's strictly forbidden to open any sealed exits into the subway or other city systems. Which basically means I go in one way and I come out that same way, no matter what happens. My issued gear was simple. A hard hat with a mounted flashlight, a handheld flashlight, a small tool backpack, a radio, and a stun gun. The stun gun wasn't for rats. The manual said that if I encountered any unauthorized person in the tunnels, homeless people, trespassers, explorers, I was to immediately shut off the helmet light, report it over the radio, and turn back. In other words, I wasn't hired to chase anyone out. That part actually made me feel better. My job was to inspect enormous power lines, cables thick as my arm, and report anything abnormal. Load spikes, damage, insulation wear. If something broke, I was to fix it or request a crew. Except Calling a crew, I learned, was strongly discouraged. Pipes were similar. Only with pipes, sometimes you had to call someone. And then there were the strange instructions, the ones that made me stop and reread the manual the first day. One said, never close the gates leading into certain dead-end passages near the subway connection. Another said, if you experience severe signal interference in radio communications, you must stop the inspection and return immediately. If you've already completed more than half the route, you're to remain where you are and wait for assistance. There were others. Enough that I remember sitting there thinking, who writes something like this unless they've seen it happen? But if you ask questions at a restricted site, you get written up. So I learned to shut up. They gave me a quick orientation. A stairwell led down into a small room, dusty, scuffed, and empty except for a single chair. On the left wall was a bricked-up elevator shaft, which was strange because there was no elevator anywhere in the building. Just the sealed shaft, like a scar. On the right side of the room, a narrow corridor led out into a huge service channel where massive pipes ran through concrete. The pipes were below entry level, and above them was a suspended metal walkway, like the catwalks you see in industrial plants. The pipes ran about 50 meters, ending at a bunker door, fixed steel, heavy hinges. Above the door, a construction lamp burned constantly, the only permanent light in that entire channel. To the left of the bunker was my workspace, behind another heavy steel door. It looked like a security office, monitors displaying pressure and voltage readings, a couple of cameras pointed at key points in the tunnels, a bed, a few metal boxes, 2 medium ones and 1 large one. It was almost cozy, if you ignored the smell. The stale air, the fact that the door looked like it belonged on a vault. Across from my door, to the right of the bunker, was the open entrance into the tunnel system. No door, just darkness. The catwalk split and disappeared into it. And directly across from the channel entrance was another door into the tunnels. Massive, tall enough to move heavy vehicles through. It didn't open. Ever. I never understood why it was there. That day, I met the radio operator on the checkpoint line. Jim. Not old, but already gray at the temples. He had a tired face and a strange little mustache that made him look like he was always trying not to say something. When we talked, he looked at me, the way someone looks at a guy walking into a bad decision. It put a knot in my stomach. For the first 2 days, I stayed in my room, watching the monitors. Nothing happened. On the 3rd day, one of the displays started spiking, a load surge on one of the lines. I keyed the radio. Checkpoint, do you copy? Loud and clear. I've got line. I read out the number. Load's showing 120 amps. That line's short circuit load is 350, Jim replied. What? Everything okay on your end? There was a pause, and then Jim dropped the formal radio voice. Listen, he said. You're gonna have to go check it, but do me a favor. Wait until that load drops, then go. Copy. The load dropped about an hour later, and for the first time I prepared to walk into the tunnels. I'll be honest, I was in a decent mood. I'd been bored out of my mind for 3 days, and I was finally going to do what I'd been hired for. I threw on my backpack, clicked on my helmet light, and radioed that I was heading out. Jim acknowledged it. I approached the tunnel entrance, not stepped into it, approached it. Because when my light hit the darkness, it didn't light up the tunnel the way you'd expect. It illuminated only the immediate walls, and then the beam died into solid black. Standing there alone, outside my little room, I suddenly realized how much that doorway felt like a mouth. The silence was so heavy my ears rang, Somewhere far away, something hummed. Machinery, ventilation, who knows? But mostly it was quiet enough that I could hear my own breathing. I had this sudden, violent thought. Walk away. Quit right now. Tell them to go to hell. But the idea of turning my back to that tunnel felt even worse than going in. So I went in. A few hundred meters in, the metal walkway ended. The air was damp and filthy. Dust hung in it like powder. It reeked of rot and wet concrete. I had to pull my sleeve over my face to stop coughing every few steps until my lungs gave up and adjusted. Eventually, I reached the trouble spot. The cables had been chewed. Not cut, chewed. The insulation was shredded, but the actual wires were untouched. The bite marks looked like teeth, but not rat teeth. Too large, too human, but wrong. I radioed it in and asked for the line to be powered down. Jim told me to wait. I set down my pack, sat on it, and lit a cigarette. 10 minutes later, the power went down. I wrapped the damaged insulation in layers and layers of tape. That's when I noticed something near the wall. A clump of slime, like fungus, like mold, like something that didn't belong. I nudged it with my boot, and somewhere far down the tunnel, maybe 300 meters away, I heard a heavy impact. A dull, wet thump, like a sack of meat hitting the ground. Something in me screamed to run, so I ran. I didn't even grab my backpack. I just ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like rubber. I stumbled back into my room, slammed the door, and only then realized my tools were gone. I reported the lost pack. The next day, management threatened disciplinary action. I wrote a report. And then, strangely, they dropped it. Like they didn't want the issue examined too closely. And when I remembered what Jim had told me, wait until the load drops, my hands started shaking. Because if I'd gone in immediately, I would have been standing out there in the dark when whatever caused that load spike was still close. The next 3 inspections were clean. Nothing strange, nothing I couldn't explain. And the pay helped. A lot. I started forgetting the first walk, telling myself it was nerves, stress, imagination. Most nights I sat in the room and watched monitors, killing time. No internet, no phone. Personal electronics were forbidden inside the facility. So I played old games on the ancient computer they left down there, just to stay sane. And one night I noticed something felt off. I paused the game. A soft knock. At first, I thought it was the pipes settling, until I realized the knocking was coming from inside the wall. And it was moving, sliding through the concrete like something crawling. I don't know what possessed me. I knocked back. Immediately, the knocking exploded into a rapid, violent pounding, and it started moving toward the door, one hit at a time. The last few strikes were so hard, the dust rained from the ceiling, and the lights flickered. Then it stopped. I sat there with the stun gun in my hands, heart slamming in my chest, trying to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. That's when I felt footsteps. Not heard, felt. The floor vibrated with slow, heavy movement, as if something enormous was walking on the pipes outside my door. It stopped right in front of the door. I should have called Jim. I couldn't even breathe properly. Then something started scratching at the door, low, near the floor. Not one set of claws, many, like a pile of hands scraping at once. Then there was a pause. Something slammed into the door. The impact was so brutal that one ceiling bulb died instantly, and a chunk of plaster broke loose and hit the floor. Panic took over. I grabbed the radio and shouted nonsense into it, barely forming words, begging them to send someone. The door took 2 more hits, then silence. 10 minutes later, the door opened from the outside. A police response team came in, and Jim, grim and calm, like he'd expected it. They inspected the door. Near the bottom, they found a heap of dead rats, piled like they'd been swept there. Their paws were worn raw. Some claws were literally stuck in the stone near the door, snapped off, like they had been trying to claw through solid concrete. There was also a small dent in the steel door. That door is solid metal, vault thickness. Whatever made that dent had to be enormous. They found nothing else. Jim said the cameras showed nothing. Management called it a structural event, a collapse. No debris, no cracks, no rubble. Just a dent in steel and dead rats piled at my door. But I still had to work. Inspection day came again, and I walked the tunnels gripping the stun gun tighter than ever. After my second inspection, I'd bought a construction respirator because the dust was so bad it felt like swallowing powder. The respirator helped. I moved faster. I didn't stop as much. I was close to the subway connection when I noticed a dead-end branch I'd never paid attention to. Cold air was coming out of it. Not just cool air, bone-deep cold. I radioed Jim. I shouldn't have, because he immediately ordered me to check it for an unsealed access point. So I went. The farther I walked into that branch, the stronger the wind became, and the colder it got. My hands started shaking, and I started hearing something inside the wind. Whispers. Not a single voice. Many. Near a bend in the passage, I saw markings all over the walls. I could pretend they were ancient runes, but they weren't. They were just crude lines. Dozens, hundreds of them, scratched into concrete, drawn in chalk, smeared in dirt, and in something dark brown that looked too much like dried blood. As I approached out, at the same time, I felt a stare. A direct, focused presence. As if something had turned its face toward me in the dark. My fingers were stiff with cold. I fumbled for the handheld flashlight on my belt, switched it on, and aimed it forward. And I saw it. I don't know how to describe it in a way that makes sense. A round head. No mouth. No nose. No features. Just folds of pale skin. And where eyes should be, 2 small black holes. Not eyes. Not sockets. Openings. Like punctures. It stared at me without blinking, and suddenly weakness poured into my body. The cold intensified. My thoughts slowed. I had this overwhelming urge to lie down on the tunnel floor and sleep. The idea of sleeping there felt safe, comforting, like going home. My brain even pictured it, curling up, trying to stay warm, slipping into sleep, and the thing approaching me while I slept. The thought should have been pure terror. Instead, it felt almost cozy. That's how I knew it wasn't just fear. Something was happening to me. The radio clicked. A little bit more responsible. We did not be more pressed this car. Now we felt it my status. Did you find the source of the air? Copy? The flashlight flickered. For a split second, the thing was right in front of my face. Then it vanished. Both lights came back to full strength. The wind stopped. The whispers died in an instant. I stood there staring into empty darkness, then finally lifted the radio. Checkpoint. The wind stopped. I didn't find the source. Copy. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. I leaned against the wall and lit a cigarette just to keep from collapsing. I was shaking. My mind kept replaying that moment where I almost decided to lie down and sleep. After the cigarette, the winds plated, I forced myself to step around the bend, just to make sure it was gone. My flashlight revealed a dead end, completely covered in those crude markings. In the center, a chalk circle. Inside it was a human body, curled in a fetal position, dried out, shrunk, preserved. No smell of decay at all. I almost threw up. And I understood that that we should look the world. What would have happened if Jim hadn't radioed me? That circle wasn't a warning. It was a result. I grabbed the radio. Checkpoint. There's a body down here. Call the police. Copy. Jim answered immediately. We will. Just get back fast. Copy. That was the second time he used my name. I walked back like a sleepwalker. Every shadow looked like that thing. I forced myself not to look over my shoulder. I reached my room, slammed the steel door, and collapsed onto the bed. I dreamed of walking through the tunnel, with wet chewing sounds behind me, afraid to turn around. Maybe I really heard chewing while I walked back. I honestly can't tell anymore. I woke up to Jim shaking my shoulder. There were no police. There were soldiers. A lot of them. They avoided looking at me directly, like I was contagious. Jim sat beside me on the bed. His breath smelled like alcohol, strong enough to sting my nose. He stared at the floor. That was Eddie, he said quietly. The guy before you. The last one in this position. My stomach turned. When you said there was a body in a circle, I knew right away. Eddie finally showed up. I wanted to scream at him, at management, at the whole place. Jim, I'm quitting. He lifted his head and looked at me with tired, sad eyes. No, he said, you're not. He paused, like it hurt to say the next part. They don't let people quit from here. You can try, but you won't find another job. Not anymore. Not after this. I didn't argue. I just stood up and went home and slept. And a week off to recover. I spent that week drinking it away, and I came back to work worse than before. Because after that, I started dreaming, almost every night, about lying down in the tunnel and falling asleep. And each time, right before I drifted off, I felt something watching me from the dark. One morning, I woke up with the sense that the day was going to be bad. It wasn't even inspection day. When I arrived, the monitors were already flashing. A severe pressure drop near the far end of the line, close to the subway connection. I radioed in. They told me to go. So I geared up and stepped back into the dark. Halfway down the tunnel, I heard rustling above me, like something moving along the pipes. It sounded like someone pushing paper through a metal tube with a long stick. I sped up. The sound followed. A rat ran across my path and I jumped, and my helmet light swung, catching a strange shadow in the distance. My hand went to the stun gun. I kept walking and realized the movement wasn't in front of me. It was above me. Something was crawling. I tried to convince myself it was rats. Just rats. Eventually, the sound faded, and I reached the damaged pipe. It had already been shut off, but the scene didn't make sense. If a pipe that large ruptures, there should be a huge puddle, a flood. There was nothing. Only a small puddle, like it had dripped after the shutoff. Then I saw the pipe surface. A long section was covered in small triangular holes, as if the metal had been bitten through repeatedly. The edges looked snapped, not cut. I knew I couldn't handle that alone. I radioed Jim and asked for a repair crew. Jim told me the crew was coming, and that I needed to wait where I was. cursed under my breath, set my flashlight aimed down the tunnel, and ate some canned food with water. A break. 2 hours passed. No crew. I radioed again. Jim sounded tense now. "They're not responding," he said. "We lost contact with them about an hour ago. Come back. Now." My stomach dropped. I remembered the crawling sounds. I packed up and started back at a fast walk. The tunnel was quiet. No rustling. No rats. That almost made it worse. Halfway back, near the same spot where I'd heard movement above, I found the crew. Or what remained. Pieces of them were threaded onto random pipe segments that had been jammed into the ground like stakes. Flesh chewed beyond recognition. Skin and organs stretched between metal like grotesque decorations. No blood. Not a single drop. The smell hit me so hard I gagged. And then, as I ran past, one chunk of lung twitched, like it was still alive. I bolted. I ran hard enough that my vision blurred. Near the tunnel exit, my flashlight caught a tall figure. Too tall, too thin, proportions wrong, like something stretched. I didn't stop. I ran straight through it. My face and hands felt like they'd been hit with boiling water. I screamed. Blisters rose instantly. I kept running, half blind, barely thinking, and right at the tunnel entrance, I hit the radio button and shouted something. I don't even remember what. Then everything went black. I woke up in a burn unit. 12 hours had passed. It felt like 12 seconds. The doctor said my eyes miraculously survived. Jim came to see me. He brought a letter from management, another bonus, and instructions. Under no circumstances was I to tell hospital staff how the injuries happened. Jim stayed for a few minutes and then said something I'll never forget. "You're the first one who's lasted this long alive down there," he said. "Maybe something's watching out for you." I looked at my bandaged hands, and I thought about those black holes where the thing's eyes should have been, and about the way it made sleep feel comforting. "I don't think it's watching from above," I said. And Jim didn't disagree.